Hello everyone, welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain and logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome to today's program Matt Yearling, who is CEO of PINC Solutions. And today we're going to talk about digital disruption in the supply chain, defining an effective path forward. Now, the digital supply chain and digital disruption, these are all, buzz terms that we're seeing a lot of in, publications, at conferences. Certainly we've done our fair share of blogging and talking about it as well. But that means different things to different people. And I think there's a lot of, confusion or, a lot of, okay, what does that mean to me exactly? And, what steps do I need to take to make sure that I'm aligning my supply chain, my logistics operations with this digital supply chain? And, we're privileged to have with us Matt today, who's kind of in the front lines of this in terms of what he does at PINC Solutions and, in terms of the companies he's working with and what he's seeing and hearing out there as well. So, earlier, a few weeks ago, he published a guest commentary that really outlined what I thought was some great, food for thought and steps in terms of how to move along this digital transformation journey, if you will. So we're going to explore that as well in our conversation today. Just a reminder for those of you that are joining us live that, part of our goal here at Talking Logistics is to make this conversational. So if you've got a question for Matt, and you can do so via the submit a question button. And, if it's a good and appropriate question, we've got time, I'll certainly try to weave it into the conversation. So with that, Matt, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Adrian, today. Thank you.
So Matt, you're a first-time guest here at Talking Logistics, and whenever I bring on a new guest, just to provide some folks with some background and also for my own, personal knowledge, I'm always interested in learning how people got involved with, supply chain logistics to begin with. So why don't you briefly just tell us a little bit about your career path and how and why you got involved with supply chain logistics and what your current role and responsibilities are there at PINC Solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. Really, my core focus from a career perspective has always been delivering enterprise applications, so whether or not that's ERP, CRM, security, and supply chain, that's really been my focus over the years, working for big software companies. In 2005, I actually had my first experience in supply chain, and that was in marine terminals. And what really draws me to supply chain and technology enablement in supply chain, was all about you could see when you give instructions and you can see pieces of equipment actually carry out those instructions, and you can see it's real tangible in terms of movement of goods. And really, it's really fueling the economy and fueling, the consumer in general. So, for me, supply chain applications was much more interesting than a CRM application, for example. And that's really why I came back in 2013 and joined PINC as the CEO. Where we are, our core focus is yard management systems, and we're in a very good situation of being the number one in the world in yard management, and we have, and I do spend a lot of time with some fantastic people and customers, and really focusing on delivering significant value and applying technology to optimize their supply chain. So for me, it's just a phenomenal experience, and working with the best and brightest in the supply chain industry.
Yeah, no, great, great career path there, and I agree. Obviously, we're both biased, but I think if you had to pick a technology realm to be in, supply chain logistics is much more exciting, much more going on there than say ERP or CRM or some of these other areas. So. I think every day we wake up and it's a whole new world out there when you look at what's happening and all the different challenges and opportunities that are out there. And certainly one of those, one of the latest umbrella topic, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, is, the digital supply chain. So let's start with a basic, question, from your perspective. What does the digital supply chain mean, and why so much buzz about it today?
Yeah, so and going back to why this is so important, right? And historically, supply chain technology enablement hasn't really been seen as delivering the significant value. I live in Silicon Valley, and everybody focuses on mobile apps and kind of the latest trend. But really, and some of these other applications, these enterprise applications, are really just focused, internally, right? They're focused focused on internal operations and making sure that they have the relevant controls, and they're following the relevant financial regulations to close their books and what have you. But from a supply chain perspective, really, when we're talking about digital disruption, it's not necessarily all about internal, but really helping define what the end customer experience for that company is. So whether or not you're a 3PL, shipper, manufacturer, whatever you are and whatever your supply chain is, it's really trying to understand, your ecosystem, your partner network, your delivery network, your end customer, and really how you're delivering, excellent customer experience, and that really should be the prime focus. And really, that's why you should identify, new ways, new means of delivering on that customer expectation and that experience.
That's a great point. And I mean, you hear so much today about, the importance of taking an outside in, perspective, and really aligning, your supply chain, as well as, your internal operations around the end customer, right? And certainly you see that a lot in retail with the consumer, right? Again, we're kind of the end, the end customer in that perspective, and you see a lot of the buzz around omni-channel there. But I know I've talked to companies, let's say in the chemical industry or in process industries or in more, discrete manufacturing that's more kind of B2B, and even companies in those industries are looking to take a more customer-centric view of not only their internal processes, but also their external processes as well, and how all those things come together. And obviously technology and everything that's happening right now, from you hear a lot of terms like Internet of Things and sensors and drones and robotics, so on and so forth. The fact that there's so much data and information being generated across the supply chain via different means. And I think it's, to your point, it's how do you leverage that, right? How do you leverage that effectively, to ultimately satisfy that customer, whether that customer is a consumer or that customer is, if you're a automotive supplier, if that customer is the automotive OEM, right? And I think that's where, in my mind, kind of where the orientation is at a high level. Is that a fair summation of kind of a paraphrasing of what you said?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You've got to really look from who your customer is on the way in, and then you'd have to understand how you're going to deliver value to that customer, and that actually, you drive priorities across the organization, and how you're going to support those initiatives, and what technology is appropriate for you to be implementing within your corporation to be able to deliver on those promises that you're delivering to the customer.
So let's talk a little bit now about how to get started, with all this. And like I mentioned in my opening remarks, in a recent blog post, you presented a 4-stage, framework for companies to consider as they develop their strategies for supply chain, digital transformation and disruption. Can you briefly walk us through kind of the 4 stages and how they build off each other?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, going back to what you were saying just now, I think, we're all well versed and aware of all of the technologies that are, out there and topical right now. And, there isn't, people really, are just getting masses of information, and there's not necessarily a framework to kind of put that into relevant categories of meaning. So when you talk about cloud and, IoT and wearables and, voice enablement and autonomous vehicles, big data, analytics, mobile enablement. There's all of these enabling technologies, but people are saying, okay, so how is that relevant to me, and how can I apply that technology to optimize my enterprise? And so, really, it's just like, what are the purpose of some of these categories of technology, and how does that help me mature or derive value for the enterprise in delivering value to the enterprise? And so that's why, I've kind of put things in 4 buckets, and it's you could say it's an evolution, right? It's kind of like an evolution of where to start and where to finish, or it depends on where you are as an organization right now. You may already have some good sophistication around software, but just from a high level perspective, the 4 phases are at the low level. You're talking about, I need to implement software to manage what I believe is the best practices in the organization today, right? That is, by default, for the most part, a cloud-based service. It's a scalable, secure, managed application for you. And really, it's taking that process or encapsulating what you believe is the best practice in your organization and doing that in a repeatable way across your enterprise. And that's what organizations should do. That means you have a well-orchestrated process. You're capturing the right information. You're moving elements down a workflow to deliver on what you need to do as a business. So that is kind of the first stage of the process, is delivering a managed service. And we do that in small organizations, larger organizations, and enterprise organizations, and able to consistently look at how you do that across all of these facilities and locations. So the next stage is really what I've said is assisted. Now, what does that mean? Well, I'm a worker that has technology enablement that's making me do things much more predictably in an increased more efficiently and higher quality, right? So if I'm looking at a box on the shelf, I have a wearable or a hand scanner, and I'm scanning that barcode, right? That's easier than writing that barcode down, right? So that's kind of an assisted, technology enablement for folks in the organization, right? And using sensors and IoT to do things that that humans would typically do, and it removes fingers off keyboards so that people are not inputting data, because as we know, most of the time, not most of the time, but very frequently, people make mistakes in inputting data, right? So let the technology do that on the fringes and enable the worker to be a lot more efficient. So on the third phase, it's automated, and what we are talking about from an automated perspective is taking those mundane, error-prone, potentially repeatable processes and automating them in an autonomous way, right? So that's why you see a lot of automation inside, manufacturing plants and warehouses, right? It's easier to train, or have a system to move goods from shelves, or putting caps on, bottles, and putting things together, and putting things in boxes and what have you, than it is having individuals do it. And then from our perspective, what that means is we have our underlying technology is all about real-time location and pinpointing assets in a very accurate way. So the way that we've done that in the past is a lot of IoT enablement and a lot of attaching sensors and equipment to existing equipment. Rather than that, what we're doing now is making autonomous aerial robots, i.e., drones. And those drones can actually do a lot of repeatable processes. So, for example, going outside and checking the inventory of tens of thousands of cars, which is a very, very time-consuming process that today everybody uses humans to do that, whether or not you're a manufacturer or a logistics provider in terms of moving automotives. So that's one use case. And then from the inside perspective, going back to what I was saying earlier, how do you consistently and repeatedly check inventory? Well, rather than me go up on a cherry picker, how about I have autonomous drones actually do that in a more efficient way? So the cycle count, for example, could be done overnight as opposed to a lengthy process over several weeks. And then the final element of this is, how do you bring this all together and optimize it? Right? It's going back to, you're collecting all this data, you've got this big data, but there's no point in having data unless you do something with it, right? And really, it's how do you have that providing some predictive guidance and analytics and making some sense of how you're doing things today, and optimizing your equipment. So we have this all the time in terms of deriving value, for our customers, and that is, you're optimizing the process, the equipment, the resources and the people resources, that you have, the assets that you have in the organization, so you can avoid spending money on things if you're doing things in a repeatable way, and then you have metrics that are consistent. And you can say, look, this works well over here. Let's apply that over here, or this works over here. Let's take that best practice and apply it over here. So, having a more optimized view and having a view across the enterprise, analyzing this data in a meaningful way, is actually proved to be very powerful. And that's really what we're seeing more of as time goes on. And that's deriving significant enterprise value, having consistency across the organization, having visibility across the organization, and seeing inventory move through the system, product move through the system. We see this all the time. So that's really it from the 4 levels.
Yeah, no, lots of food for thought there. I mean, my takeaways, based on your comments there, and obviously the blog post was, obviously you need to have that, some fundamental capabilities, right, before you can move into the assisted and ultimately the optimized stage, right? So it's the whole kind of crawl, walk, run type of philosophy. Right, because I think if you don't start out at that managed stage, you're not going to get as much value or be able to do, the capabilities further up, as effectively as possible. Right, that's number one. I think number two, I think the interesting thing, you talked about drones. Obviously, a lot of buzz around that today. A lot of the conversation is usually around the consumer end in terms of using drones to deliver packages to you and me at home. But I think as you talked about, there's a lot of great applications happening today in terms of using that kind of technology within a warehouse environment, within a yard environment, for example, to do, this inventory counting and processes within those types of environments, which I think is interesting and I think doesn't get enough play. I mean, what's been, kind of to kind of touched upon that a little bit. I mean, what's been the response to date in terms of using autonomous aerial vehicles or drones within yards or warehouses? Is this something that's cutting edge, bleeding edge? Is this something that's getting more adopted today? What are you seeing there?
Look, we could talk for the next 2 hours, several hours, in fact, the whole day about drones and what we're seeing in the industry. I think, number one, and what people really don't, people have a very surprised look on their face when we tell them that we're today the only FAA-approved drone in the supply chain, because we're not flying around any infants or pets, right? We're flying in controlled environments. We are not doing the last mile delivery, and the FAA are playing catch up, but they have got their pedal to the metal. They are moving so fast, and they're being very smart. So I mean, I've got to take my hat off to FAA and what they're doing. And how they're responding to the industry. One thing's very clear is that what you're seeing and what you have seen over the years from frequency spectrum, from the radio waves, from the FCC perspective, you're going to see that from the FAA and airspace perspective. So and maintaining that the separation between commercial, private, and drones and what have you. So that is going to be a significant factor, and the airspace is going to be very, very crowded. But so the whole topic of drones is very relevant. I would say it's fact, because I talk to the largest companies in the world. Every single company in the world has a drone initiative going on now. Whether or not this is bleeding edge, or whether or not they're going to implement it in the next couple of weeks or months, it doesn't matter. The reality is nobody is discounting the fact that this is a very highly relevant disruptive technology that can pay significant dividends for an organization, and they are looking at it. And there's so many use cases. We have 4 use cases that we focus on, and one of them is not delivery. Delivery is going to take a while, and that's going to take. We'll let the big guys, focus on that. The Amazons and the Walmarts of the world and Googles of the world focus on the last mile delivery problem. But from our perspective, there's so many significant opportunities upstream, and it's really, it's a really near adjacency to what we feel that we are good at, and that is really tracking large value assets, large assets. And optimizing that experience in an intelligent way with these aerial devices. And I'm going to have to tell you. I mean, I've just said it, but every single large company has a drone initiative today. Fact, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I see the same thing. At a minimum, I know that I get a lot of questions about it, and companies want to know, what's real and what's myth, right? And kind of what's the current potential applications, for this, particularly outside of the consumer realm, because I think you're right, in terms of when it comes to, even though it gets the bulk of the attention, outside from, making the last mile deliveries to consumers. I think a lot of companies recognize that there's a lot of opportunities, for some of their, processes internally as well. So in your experience, I mean, what do you see as the biggest challenge in getting started with digital, transformation journey, and getting to, let's say, even just that first step, that managed stage?
Yeah, no, that is, the biggest question, right? And that's what really gets me energized about what we're doing. When I look at, from my perspective, when I look at my target market, and really I'm just looking at it from a North America perspective, in Americas. I define my market as, optimizing those 500 million trailer shipments across the 250,000 plants and warehouses that transacts every year. 500 million trailer shipments. And, at last count, what is that? That's a $1.5 trillion business, of which 2/3 of that is relating to the movement of freight by road. So, freight movement by road, 500 million trailer shipments, across an immense network, is my target market. And if you look at the level of sophistication that exists in that today, it's just completely lacking, right? The only thing that's really made significant headway in this, based on regulations, is telematics and electronic logging devices and what have you. But we're going to start seeing a lot more regulations forcing a lot of change, right? Whether or not it's food safety or anything else that's coming down the line here. So that's what we're focused on, right? We're focused on increased predictability, safety, quality, velocity. That's what we're all about, from point A to point B. And the other thing that people don't understand is that, from dock door to dock door, because that's what we're talking about, 80% of the time, these assets, these trailer assets, or these goods are sitting idle in either the source or destination. Only 20% of the time are they actually going across the road from point A to point B. So even more important to have, technology enablement that we provide to be able to do that in a more optimized way. So when I look at that, right, we got 250,000 plants and warehouses. Today, as a company, we're single-digit penetrated in that market space. Why? Because for the most part, our competitors do nothing. And the level of sophistication is pen and paper. I mean, fact, reality. I mean, that's what we're doing. To change, or the willingness to do something that would optimize, right? A lot of people just can't find material, right? So one of the things that we find all the time, we in the automotive space, we have some very, very good automotive customers, and what do they have? They have about 700 trailers that have got inbound supplies feeding the production line, and guess what happens? They lose visibility when it comes into the facility. They have no clue where that is to pick product, and they do things that they say they never do, and that is they pick material from the trailer. They pull it up to the dock door, pick material, then they drop it back, right? And so how to orchestrate that and optimize that is what we do all the time. So a lot of companies are doing this at a necessity, especially in the automotive when you're dealing with high value assets. But it's not just automotive, we're seeing that all the time. And, these large enterprises will obviously, the top 10, 20% of the companies understand that now, they need to have some technology enablement, and the rest of that 250,000 plants and warehouses will come to that realization, a little bit further into the future. But, that's really number one is, understanding that they need to do something different other than a manual process. Willingness to change, right? And then the next step is quantifying the value. So from our perspective, when we look at delivering solution, there is not a single customer that we've implemented that has had an ROI more than 9 months, right? Typically, value is within 3 to 6 months, and that's what the expectation is, and that's what we measure, and that's what we deliver at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, great points there, and I like the point that your biggest competitor is basically do nothing, right? Which is I think has been the reality in the industry for far too long, and I think when I look at the market, whether it's in this realm or even in just basic transportation management or other parts of supply chain, I think because the environment's become much more global, because it's becoming much more dynamic, because of the competitive environment being, much more intense, I think a lot of companies are coming to a realization that, the status quo or the way we've been doing things is not going to result in the same level of success moving forward as it has in the past. And I think that's what's going to open the door to opportunities, such as this to really, rethink, how supply chain processes are designed and how they're managed, moving forward. Now, you touched upon this a little bit, but maybe you can talk a little bit about kind of the benefits that companies can expect to achieve as they move up, the maturity curve of digital transformation, as they go from managed all the way to optimized. I mean, what kind of benefits can they achieve in what areas?
Oh, well, I mean, it's a long list of benefits, right? But really at the end of the day, it's consistency on how they deliver. That ultimately, right, when you're dealing with a customer, you want to educate, you want to provide the services that you need, you want to set expectations, you want to deliver on those expectations, right? And you want to do that in a predictable way, right? No surprises. Nobody wants to have any surprises. And then unfortunately, we depend too much on everybody doing heroic efforts to get things done, and that only gets an organization so far. It's not a scalable method of operating into the future. So you need to have technology to make the workers be more efficient, right? And so that means being more predictable, being more efficient, so you can do more with less, right? And the other thing that we're seeing a lot more of, and that is transparency across related parties. Just because I am a manufacturer of food, I depend on people to do things so that my end customer enjoys the product in a safe way, right? That it's not spoiled, it's not late, or it's got to where it needs to be in a timely way. So you're depending on a lot of people to pull off everything in an orchestrated way to make that happen. I'll give you an example, because this is a real example. Transparency is important, and what we've heard from several customers, as just an example, is that this is a belief. Maybe it's not a reality, but I believe that my carrier uses my distribution center as a parking lot for their trailers when they're not using them, and or they don't know where their assets are when they need them, and or they're charging me too much for detention demurrage charges, right? So what we can provide is the visibility and access so that carriers like that can actually get that information. Right. So, in the detention demurrage example is actually a perfect example, right? Because I have one customer that their carrier was actually compensated on billing accuracy. So they actually welcomed to have the it was embracing to have the information in their hands so that they could provide accurate billing. So once again, taking the ambiguity out of the equation, getting transparency, dealing with the facts. Is really has been phenomenal in terms of collaboration between related parties, and we're seeing a lot more of that, right? And that's between 3PLs and shippers as well. We're seeing a lot more of how do the 3PLs become more sticky? How do they differentiate themselves in providing services? How do they provide value to the shipper in giving them what they need and giving them information that they would not probably get from some other 3PL? So I think it's enhancing the efficiencies of the system, It's getting closer relationships and collaboration and partnerships based on the transparency, and then the efficiencies. It's just going to be phenomenal, and it's going to have to happen because of the expectation of the consumer. Right? Everybody wants instant gratification, and that means scale and efficiencies like we haven't seen. And this is still a journey, so there's a lot more that needs to be done for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, we're kind of coming to short on time here. So I've got a couple of other questions, before we wrap up here. You touched upon what was going to be my next question, which was, talk a little bit about some, examples of how companies are achieving, early success in digital supply chain disruption. I mean, you gave kind of a good example there of some of the benefits. Any other examples you can share?
Yeah, no, I think the automotive one is actually a phenomenal use case because and we're fortunate because certain automotive manufacturers have trusted us to not only be on the supply side of their supply chain, but on the finished product side, finished vehicle side of their supply chain. And so what that means is, the use case that I was telling you earlier, and that is making sure that there's no delay on, you got to have that production line being productive, right? You can't have any outages on the production line. That production line needs to have those supplies when the production line needs them. So understanding where all the supplies are and understanding how the inventory flows into the manufacturing plant is of key importance, and that's really where we first start with a lot of automotive manufacturers. The next stage is really how do we assist or help them on tracking that vehicle as it's being built down the production line. So we've done some work, a lot of good work around manufacturing execution as well. And then the various stages of varying stages of finished product, right? Whether or not it has to go up to a quality area, whether or not it's got to be held for some additional, add-on parts, or whether or not it needs to go to pre-delivery inspection, or whether or not it's ready to be shipped. How do you keep track of that? And in some cases, we're talking about tens of thousands of vehicles. And going back to what I was saying earlier, the rudimentary means of how they track those assets is mind-boggling. Even those car manufacturers that have technology enablement, that have GPS, that have sensor enablement, actually within the vehicle themselves, they still need a lot of technology enablement to actually track a lot of those assets. Another good example, we touched on the 3PLs. I think the 3PLs, are really embracing technology to provide stickiness, differentiation, efficiency, and transparency. So that's what I touched on just now. But another interesting one, and this is very topical too, and that's internet retail. Big retail stores and how they're embracing the velocity of internet retail. And really, it is all about velocity, right? It's not necessarily the inbound supplies coming into the network. It's how to make sure that I meet my objective, right? Because I have KPIs, and I have KPIs that I meet, efficiency targets that I need to meet, and I've got a well orchestrated timeline, from when the consumer clicks buy to when that consumer gets charged to when that consumer is updated when the product is on the way, and set expectations on when that product is going to arrive at their home, is really kind of interesting, right? So we personally get involved in optimizing the velocity around dock doors, optimizing the available empties to fulfill the outbound loads. Optimizing outbound velocity, velocity through gate infrastructure is fast becoming a big concern for these large companies as well. And really, once again, how do you have the transparency around that? And when is the critical time when the consumer actually gets billed? Well, in some cases it's when that trailer, that load, checks out of the facility. So there's a lot of different areas where our customers are deriving value, and it's not just the traditional yard management, orchestrating yard trucks, trailers, people, dock doors, gate operations, orchestrating those. There's a lot of different things that we help make more efficient, and a lot of different things that we've done for organizations to optimize so that they don't need to have so many assets. They don't need to have so many people. They don't need to have so many yard trucks. They don't need to have as many refrigerated units and as well. So we've seen this time and time again for all of the verticals, and that's why we enjoy a good level of success in all verticals across the industry.
Yeah, a lot of great examples there, and I think provide some good food for thought for folks in terms of trying to think through the various ways to kind of move forward with this journey. Which kind of brings me to my last question here. I mean, as a way to wrap up, I mean, what advice would you give to companies that are looking for help in building the business case, if you will, for digital supply chain disruption or transformation? I mean, how do they go about doing that?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it really starts at kind of what the need is. I mean, what's the big problem that you're trying to solve, right? Let's not try to look for a piece of technology and try to figure out how that's relevant to my business. You've got to be well versed, obviously, in terms of what the available technology is out there. But really, it starts at the business need, identifying the business need, and then trying to understand, how to best, solve for that problem. And really, they do need to have, advice from independent parties like yourself, right, and other organizations that could provide, that industry expertise and enlightenment around, what are the ways to approach these situations, having some good, independent, trusted experience in terms of trying to apply some of this technology. But going back to what I was saying earlier, we still are at a level of sophistication that is still relatively primitive, especially in the area that we are in. So, the first things first, you just need to get a piece of software that is actually encapsulating what you believe that you think is happening today. Invariably, it's not what you think is happening today. We see that time and time again. So at least manage this environment and try to manage it in a more predictable way. And then try to look at opportunities for, what is going to provide the biggest value to you as an organization, whether or not that is, kind of a, sensor network to identify where assets are, more efficiently, or doing some autonomous stuff, or, are you a large organization of small manufacturing plants that you really want to have, visibility across the enterprise, and maybe that's where you want to start first. There's many different ways, but it all comes back to the need. But, the first stage is always try to manage that with a solution that really is fit for the need and is going to provide the value that you're expecting. That's really where you need to start.
No, great advice. I particularly like the fact that you got to identify that the business opportunity or the business case or the business problem that you're going to solve. I think a lot of times companies may become infatuated with the next new shiny thing, and are kind of then searching for a problem, right? To align this particular solution, where you really have to focus first on what is it you're trying to accomplish, right, and get some good definition around that and support around that, and then to your point, really starting with that managed standpoint, making sure you've got that foundation in place before you move forward with the rest of it. Matt, I think, like I always say at the end of all our episodes, we could probably spend hours, talking about each of these topics, and then we usually just manage to scratch the surface. But I think, we provided some good food for thought and advice and ideas here. So again, thank you very much for making the time to be with us.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure, Adrian. And if you ever want to talk on the phone for a few days around drones, feel free to give me a call. We'll certainly have a good conversation.
I'm sure, I think we'll continue to see more innovation along those fronts and everything under the umbrella of what we just talked about. So again, thank you for making the time. I want to thank those of you who joined us today. We didn't get any questions live, but if you do have a question for Matt and you're watching this episode on demand, you can find this episode on talkinglogistics.com, and you can post a question or a comment there, and I'm sure that Matt will be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you all for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.